Hi, Fareed. Nice to see you.
Hey, Will, how are
Good
you?
morning, Tim. Hi, Stuart. Welcome.
Great.
Morning, Juan. Great to see you.
Hey, Will.
Morning, Jamie. Allison, nice to see you. Welcome. It's been a while. Hi, Ben. Hi, Mario. Hey, Mac. Welcome, welcome. All right. Well, I'm excited for today. And Sharon, passing it over to you.
Hey, thank you, everyone. Happy to see so many familiar faces. If you have a second, just post in here where y'all are from, just so we can get an idea. I'd like to introduce two amazing guests today. I know that for a lot of us, ChatGPT has been top of mind. It's really being hailed as a transformative AI breakthrough. I mean, it hit, I think, 1 million users within the first 5 days or something like that. So that's kind of insane. And so the question right now in a lot of founders' minds is, what do we need to think about? Do we need to implement this into our own products and services? Or is it just something that we use just to make our lives a little bit easier as founders? And the bigger thing, what are investors looking for? Is this even, do they even care right now? Or, what are the key things that they're looking for? So our guests today, Jeremy Burton, CEO, co-founder, Platform VC, based out of San Francisco, and Chhavi Singh, co-founder, Flyte AI, tons of experience in the fintech space and AI space, joining us from Toronto. Thank you, gentlemen. We're really happy to have you here. And I'm going to pass it on to Will Sachs, our CEO at Fulcrum Venture Accelerator. You can take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Sharon. Welcome everybody to this event, How to Leverage AI to Win Your Market and Win with Investors. I'm Will Sachs. I'm the founder and CEO of Fulcrum Venture Accelerator. We are an accelerator for mission-based entrepreneurs who are raising seed capital. And every 3 months, we run a cohort of founders, a highly vetted cohort of founders, through a proven process of fundraising development to help them close their seed rounds. So if that's something you're interested in, you can go to fulcrumventureaccelerator.com and learn more about that. And I am stoked for today because I first used ChatGPT in December, early December of last year. And remember that moment because it really crystallized in my mind, oh my God, something new is possible now that was not possible before. And I'd love to invite everybody on the call to just put in the chat, like, when was the first time you used ChatGPT? How long has it been? Was it today? Have you not used it yet? Did you try it in December or January? I'd love to see that. And as we're getting those answers, I'd love to pass it over to our guests to introduce themselves. So Jeremy Burton, welcome.
Thanks, Will. Good to be here. So as you said, I run Platform. So Platform underneath the covers is two things. It's what we call a dual entity. We have a fund, which has capital in it to invest in startups, and we have a studio team that builds startups. So we do two things. We use the money in the fund to build new startups to address problems that we want to solve, and we also make direct investments from the fund. We are looking a lot at generative AI. It's one of our big investment themes, and yeah, I agree, it's potentially a transformative new enabler. So I'm happy to talk more about it.
Great, me too. I'm excited to talk about it. And Chhavi Singh, I'd love to give you a minute to introduce yourself.
Sure. Hey, everyone. My name's Chhavi. Glad to be here and excited to talk to you guys about ChatGPT today. My background is in a mixture of investment and startups in the AI space. And I'm currently a co-founder of Flyte, which is an AI platform for sales teams. So we analyze sales calls and create insights for sales teams out of that. I've had background as a VC as well as at Microsoft during their accelerators. So I have some background as to what those guys were thinking about on those space. So excited to talk to you guys about that as well. Let me know if you guys have any specific questions. Otherwise, I'm excited to get this discussion going.
Yeah, well, my first question, I think, is what does this mean? Like, what's the big picture here? And I'll pass it back to you, Chhavi.
Yeah, glad you asked that. So one of the things people look at ChatGPT as is this really transforming anything? And there's like two very different schools of thought. There are people who are like, my world has changed. The world is not going to be the same again ever. And then there are others who are like, yeah, I know, it's okay. I still need to find a problem that this one solves. So there are these two different schools of thought. And the way investors are looking at this is, so just to give you guys a perspective here, think about the introduction of iPhone to the world, which was like iPhone was around, like phones were around, smartphones were around. What iPhone did was it gave an interface to people that was easy to use. And that's essentially all it did. It minimized a PC into the palm of your hand, and you could use gestures and like touch screen and stuff like that. What that did was that changed and opened up a Pandora's box of things that people could do now on the move that they could not have imagined doing a couple of years ago. It's the same thing that is happening in in AI space now, where AI was only available to a lot of like tech sophisticated founders. And all of a sudden with ChatGPT, it gave an interface to individuals to look at how far AI has come along and get the juices flowing for entrepreneurs like yourself around what is possible using this technology. It's an interim step. It's not an end in itself, but it does open up a Pandora's box of what people can build using this technology. It's a raw material is the way I would look at it.
Yeah. Jeremy, passing it over to you. What do you think this all means?
Yeah, I think, investors generally look at this, as you might not be surprised to hear, from an economic standpoint. And I think the most interesting thing for me is how we seem to have passed with ChatGPT a critical bar where enough sort of manual tasks or semi-manual tasks can now be automated to significantly lower the cost of delivering certain services. So I think, obviously there's been a lot of automation, there's definitely been AI before, but it feels like a inflection point where now, when we used to have humans in the loop in a lot of tasks, we now can get away with not having humans in the loop, whether that's content generation, parsing unstructured data and turning that into structured data, generating test data. There's just a lot of use cases that now effectively the cost goes to zero or close to zero, which means it's possible to do things in a way which is economically viable that couldn't be viable before because you needed some level of human in the loop. So that's the thing. I think the thing that's really exciting is especially those sort of matching activities. I mean, we have within Platform, we have a tool, for example, called DexSend, which is a platform for sharing decks and matching fundraising decks to investors. We're able to parse the narrative inside a fundraising deck and kind of pull out the key points of it and then match that to investors that might be interested. And that before would have taken, some kind of human in the loop to do that. So we can do that, almost instantaneously now in a way in which we couldn't do before. So I think really lowering the cost is what it's all about for us. But I do think it's important to remember it's not magic, right? So you cannot create a business from a technology alone. You still have to have an unmet need that enough people suffer from and enough people are willing to pay for a solution for to generate a business. So it's really about matching that new enabler, that inflection point with an opportunity to solve a problem that's real, that people want to pay for.
Yeah, and do you think this is a transformational technology, or does this just make us more efficient with the things that we're already doing?
Well, I think for the first time, ChatGPT, I think this is the thing that wowed all of us, right? I mean, on one hand, ChatGPT is just, a completion engine. You just suggest text and it comes up with what are likely completions to that text. But I think for all of those who played with ChatGPT, we, for the first time, experienced sort of human readable text being generated on many, many different subject matters. And it was very, very hard to tell until you really sort of picked away at it, whether it was written by a human or not. So I think it's definitely, it's an inflection point, right? But that doesn't mean that there was, it's not a absolute black or white issue, but it's definitely a big change. And I think the thing to remember as well is we're just at the beginning. So I mean, ChatGPT is obviously, there's GPT-3, there's going to be GPT-4, there's going to be lots of vendors coming into the market with their own solutions. right now, GPT-3, the model itself, the language model itself is only available to Microsoft on an exclusive license. You can't use GPT to train your own set of data, but there's loads of vendors out there who are starting to offer the ability to take any large data set of text and build your own sort of ChatGPT-like solution. So we're at the very beginning. We can't really judge it based on where it is today. We have to think about where it's going to be in, 1, 2, 5 years time.
Yeah. We had a team meeting at Fulcrum, and I said to the whole team that we're going to adopt this as a practice inside Fulcrum. So whenever we're doing anything, is there a way that ChatGPT can make us more efficient and more effective at this? And then thinking about that, I was like, well, hey, ChatGPT should be an employee of ours, and ChatGPT should be in Slack. We should be able to interact with ChatGPT like the other members of the team and collaborate and build teamwork with this new functionality. And it sounds like, Chhavi, you're doing that with Flyte, with analyzing sales calls. That used to be done probably with a sales manager, could probably analyze like 1 out of every 100 calls. Now you can probably analyze all 100 calls and in a matter of seconds, feedback to the sales team what they could do to improve sales, I'm imagining. Is that how founders need to be thinking about this, do you think, Chhavi?
Yeah, that actually raises a very fundamental question that we as founders have to think about in a situation like this, which is how far along is what it is out there that I can use, and what do I need to build? Now, if you take it to a fundamental level, there's one thing, and I've been involved in the AI space for decades now. So one thing that all people who've been involved in the AI space long enough know is that a generic AI model can only provide accuracy to a certain level. That's usually good, but not at a very high level. But if you specialize an AI model in a certain field, in a certain industry, then it can do wonders for that industry. And then you can replicate that across different ones. That was the approach that we took for Flyte as well. There were technologies available when we founded Flyte that could have on paper done what we do. What we did was we took that generic thing and we said, let's focus on one set of conversation, which is sales call, and let's see how far along can we get in terms of accuracy, in terms of value add. And today, the way Flyte does it is very different from the way a human would do it. But the kind of insights you're able to gather from that is something you can't do if you were to analyze your own call for an hour or a day. You will still not be able to find all the information we are able to find in seconds because of the technology. So what that raises as a point is that when you look at a tool like ChatGPT, look at it this way. So we talked about GPT-3, GPT-2, there's going to be a GPT-4. These are generic models. They've been around for longer than ChatGPT. What ChatGPT gave us was an interface to interact with that in a different way, in a textual format. So what GPT is a generic model, and you have to then use that for a specific industry. ChatGPT was our way to interact with it and therefore get to know how accurate it is. And finding your own industry as a founder where you want to implement a tool like this, and then recognizing a problem where you want to implement this, and then being able to solve that are the next few steps that we as founders have to do to make sure we're leveraging the technology correctly. There are more questions that are being raised around whether you should depend on GPT models or should you build your own, should you get it from somewhere else. That is something that the industry will evolve into later on. As of today, these are the most sophisticated models out there. And let's not forget they're owned by big corporations, and that comes with its own baggage. We'll come to that later on. But that's the way I would suggest a founder should look at it. It's a generic model. It can do a lot of things decently. It cannot do everything very well. And you have to find out in your industry, how can you implement it and how can you do it better than someone else? Because anyone can just plug in that model and get the same set of results. If you want to implement it in your company, you have to think about things that you can do beyond what ChatGPT can do in your industry to get an edge beyond everyone else.
Yeah, great point. And what does that look like? And for a founder of an early stage company, does that look like taking a developer and saying your job is going to be to develop a language model and an AI around our subject matter, whether we're building software for restaurants or we're doing a consumer healthcare company? Like, what's the simplest way for a founder who maybe has a few team members and not a lot of funding yet to get started with this?
That's a fantastic question. So I would say identify the main problem where you want to apply this AI to, and then come up with a solution that you think can solve that problem, validate the hell out of that. That's all founder stuff. If you've done all of that and you know exactly where to implement it, and you're looking for ways to actually go ahead and implement it, the easiest way, hacking way, is to, for the moment, use what's available. So you can use Open API for the time being, or if you're a fan of Google's one, and then keep an eye on trying to replace that with something in-house eventually. And this is extremely important because you want to have a sustainable solution. Like the other day, ChatGPT was down for a couple hours. There were folks that had implemented Open API in their software, and they could not provide services to their customers because the whole platform was down. Now that raises the question around dependability on something like this. So if you're implementing something like this in your company, start with what's available, which is what we have today, but then keep an eye on bringing things in-house, or either building or buying or having multiple vendors, to make sure you're not dependent on something generic at this moment. And even investors, when they look at a company that says we are using ChatGPT or OpenAI to do X, Y, Z, one of the things they look for is, have you just written like 5 to 10 lines of code on top of ChatGPT and are claiming to have an AI company? Or do you really have a sustainable business out there beyond that? How dependent are you on this technology? If Microsoft pulls the plug on providing this thing to you tomorrow, would your company go down, or would you still be able to sustain that? Those are things that you as founders and obviously investors would also want to look at. So it's a toy that's available to you as founders to play around with, but make sure you remember it is still a toy. It's not a fundamental thing that you can rely on for a very long period of time. You want to make sure that A, you solve the problem, and B, you come up with your own solution to keep solving that problem beyond what's available today.
Yeah, great wisdom. Jeremy, what do you think? Same question, like for an early stage founder that has a small team and a little bit of funding, or is maybe seeking funding, like what's the best way to get going, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and it wasn't me, another investor recently said, generative AI or GPT is like catnip for venture investors, right? So it's kind of this thing that, despite themselves, they get very locked into, and every deck that I receive suddenly now has GPT wedged into it somehow, in the same way that Web3 was 2 years ago, and aggregated demand was 10 years ago. There's these sort of things that everyone feels like they have to have in their deck. So I agree that it has to be a sort of a real use case. That said, I do think that the publicly available APIs are a good place to start, and I don't think you need to sort of dive into writing a lot of code up front. I think about those parts of the flow. If you think about your product and the sort of jobs to be done within your product, and also the flow and the jobs to be done within your business, think about those steps that are kind of grunt work, that are kind of boring and repetitive, and take a lot of time, but don't necessarily add a huge amount of value. And then just play around with GPT or other technologies and see if there's an opportunity to improve those and make those more efficient, to allow people to focus on the bits that really add value. So if you think about maybe another product that people will have heard of, if you think about Copilot for GitHub, it doesn't really write code for you. I mean, it kind of does, in the sense that it literally inserts code, but what it's really doing is it's saving the developer from having to remember all that API documentation or remember the exact syntax of a certain call. So it's just saving you those boring, repetitive steps. And I think if you just play around in one of the, and I posted one in the chat, if you play around in one of the sort of playgrounds of these tools, you can just start to ask questions and include bits of data from your own product or your own company, and see what ChatGPT does in terms of, is it good at summarizing that text? Is it good at turning unstructured text into structured text? And just see if those sort of start to lead you towards use cases that make sense, before you kind of like dive headlong into it and start, really betting or writing lots of code.
Yeah. Great. Let's talk about fundraising. And for founders who are fundraising, all the tasks that go along with fundraising, getting your story and your pitch dialed, making materials, finding the right investors for your opportunity, getting in front of those investors, following up. Jeremy, where do you see AI playing a role in this whole world for founders?
Yeah. I think it's a massively inefficient matching problem right now in terms of matching founders who are trying to raise money with investors who are seeking to deploy capital. It's a sort of crazy old school world of who knows who and warm introductions and a lot of I think very inefficient processes when you kind of apply system thinking to it, because there's really not that many variables when you look at an investor's preferences. There's how big are the checks they write, what are the sectors they're interested in investing in, do they lead or do they follow, and their thesis on the investments that they're making. And all of those things in my mind are quite amenable to technologies like GPT to sort of understand the narrative of a story, the narrative of a fundraise, and the preferences of an investor and match those two together. So at Platform, we as I mentioned earlier, we have this tool we developed called DexSend. It's always an interesting one when you build something to solve your own use case. So we built DexSend to solve our own problem, which is how do we manage this like huge pipeline of endless decks that come towards us and try and go through them efficiently. And we now make that available for free to anyone to use. So by all means, check it out. So when you upload the deck as a founder, or use AI to actually analyze your narrative and kind of give summaries and then match those to investors based on its analysis of the narrative. And that really does two things. It makes the match more efficient, but it gives the founder some really good feedback on their deck, because there are definitely, even quite experienced founders tend to miss key parts of the narrative or miss slides in their narrative. So being able to give them that feedback almost in real time is super useful.
Yeah, that sounds like a super cool tool. Can you put the link to that? Oh, there it is. Great. Somebody shared it. Chhavi, what do you think for fundraising for founders? How do these tools come into play?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So the way I look at fundraise is a little bit more qualitative than quantitative. So if you assume that you do have to reach out to 1,000 VC funds to get funding, then it is a problem and you want to automate that. And if ChatGPT can help you do that, why not? The way I approach this is it's more qualitative. So you try and find out the ones that you are connected with, get an introduction, see if they're interested. Many times they might have a thesis that's different that you can find out. If that's the case, and they like you, they're going to introduce you to someone whose thesis aligns with yours. So it's a lot more high-tech kind of approach, where the initial parts of preparing yourself as a company for fundraise can be automated, can leverage ChatGPT. But once you have all the documentation in place, the lists are out there, the people are out there, it's a lot more of a high-touch kind of qualitative process than quantitative. So I see limited use in using ChatGPT for fundraise only up to the point where you're preparing yourself as a company. So cleaning up your deck, having your legal documentations in place, having a data room, having a list of VC funds that you want to compile, all of those things, obviously you can automate. Once you have a list, once you know whom to reach out to, everything else beyond that, thankfully, is still very, very human. And I would suggest you continue to not force ChatGPT or any such technology into a process unless you naturally think it's applicable there. So if you find yourself doing something brainless and repetitive, obviously, by all means, use that. But I doubt if that's what you're doing at the very end of your fundraise journey, it might not be a good thing to do. So once you get in front of investors, once you're able to find some, leave every tech aside and make sure you connect with them on a human basis, because that's how fundraisers are done mostly.
At the end of the day, yeah. I like how you said, Jeremy, how it's a matching problem. And I try to just remind our founders that that really is the case. It's you're matching an opportunity with an investor. And it seems like it seems like ChatGPT could be used to find a list of, like, if I have a given opportunity as a founder, I can ask ChatGPT to look through a database or a website and tell me the 10 top investors that might have the most interest or the most alignment with my opportunity. Are you doing that with founders? Like, are you using ChatGPT to try and find founders that are most aligned with what you guys are looking for at platform?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think there's sort of in my mind, a truth sort of somewhere between the two extremes here. So what I see, and I say this as I've spent most of my life as on the other side of the table as a founder and an operator, an entrepreneur, and I'm kind of relatively new to being on the other side of the table. So I think in my heart, I'm still a founder. And it's been I'm going through an identity crisis over the past few years to become a venture investor. So bear that in mind when I say this, but founders agonize, of course, over every slide in their deck and every single part of their story. But when you actually look at the data that companies like DocSend and others publish, I mean, your average investor spends like 4 minutes on a deck that they are going to invest in and like 2 minutes in a deck they're not. So they're not, you really have to kind of simplify and dumb down because, investors are looking at hundreds of decks a week. So, I think the actual closing of the deal is definitely a very human experience, but the purpose of the deck is to get you that first meeting and nothing more. So the more efficiently you can get that first meeting, the better off you're going to be, because the more time, the quicker you're going to get the fundraise closed, and the faster it's going to happen. So I think there's definitely a role to just make sure that founders understand how their narrative is being received by investors, or looking at hundreds and hundreds of decks. They're just looking for very specific key pieces of information, and everyone wants to pretend that they're incredibly sophisticated and that it's a very complex process, but it's actually, in my mind, not that complicated, because it's really about those key things, right? Like, what is the what is the track record? What are the track record of the founders, which is relatively easy to use things like AI to connect with known data sources. What is how much money they're raising, which round is it? Those kind of things. You can screen it as an investor, which I am now. You can screen out a huge amount of your deal flow just with some basic screening to allow you to focus on a much smaller set of opportunities using some of these sort of matching techniques.
It's like I see a future where founders are going to be using ChatGPT to write the emails to investors, highlighting those things that they know investors are looking for, and investors are going to be using ChatGPT to screen those emails. It's kind of a bizarre situation where you've got the founder and the investor trying to make this match, and then you've got the robots in between mediating the matching. So it'd be interesting to see how that goes.
I think the interesting question is whether the funding deck survives as a thing, because once you have, as you said, once you have systems talking to each other, it becomes kind of irrelevant, right? It really then just becomes a match based on structured data. Essentially, what you're trying to do is take the unstructured data in the funding deck, turn it into structured data, and then match on that. So why not cut out?
I have the deck.
Right?
Yeah. Interesting. Maybe the deck is going to go extinct. What do you think, Chhavi?
Actually, I think this is very fascinating. So I agree with that. So many times I've dealt with founders who have a fantastic story, strong background. They just don't know how to articulate that in an impressive way, because their job is to build that business. So at that moment, if you're able to use ChatGPT or some similar platform to come up with a compelling story that can help you convey the truth about your own company and your own background, I think that could be a very useful tool for a lot of founders, obviously not for all. I don't really believe in the matching thing, because I feel like at the end of the day, long ago, PCs had pretty much given up on a matching algorithm. What they essentially are saying is, get me a warm intro and let's talk. And most of the successful fundraised results end up being successful because someone knew someone who made an introduction, everyone liked each other, and then everything fell in place. Otherwise it didn't. So getting to that first introduction is usually just through warm introductions, and beyond that, when you are actually speaking with them and conveying them, either sending your deck or conveying them to them your story, you can use ChatGPT to make sure that you're using that in a compelling fashion so you can convey what you're doing in a clear way. Now, that would be you utilizing that to prepare your pitch, prepare your deck, and then using that on a human level. So the other person would actually consume what was generated slightly with the ChatGPT. I feel like there's a lot more human element towards the end, but even in the beginning, getting introductions is usually the best way to get it. Now, how do you get that introduction? If you can use ChatGPT to tell you what the right approach is and how to write those introduction emails asking for a warm intro to a VC, that could be gold, because believe me, the ROI on getting a warm introduction is way higher than getting 5 or 10 different matches, because the thesis that people write on their website, the investors, are usually like they're okay, but that will not get you a first meeting. The thing that'll get you a first meeting is the VC noticing you through some means, and that usually can be anything, including a warm introduction. So you have to understand what they're looking at and how you can get in front of them. And then you can utilize ChatGPT to make sure that your message and your deck and everything else is easier to understand from their perspective. So can you say, hey, describe what I do for a 3-year-old or a 3rd grade person, and you can tell them, this is what I do. Can you simplify that for a 3rd grade? And then use that as a description that's useful. So use it spiritually that way. Not to efficiently run a process, because it's not like B2B sales where you send out 1,000 emails hoping to get some responses and being able to sell a B2B software.
Yeah, I love that. Like using ChatGPT to simplify the story or the pitch or the overview of what a founder is working on so that anyone can understand it right away. Because we see that over and over again. Founders are so far in the weeds that it's hard for them to just communicate simply, like, I'm making an app that helps so-and-so do XYZ. So that's a great use case. All right, well, I'd love to start taking some questions. Let's see, what do we have in the chat here? If anybody has questions, please toss them in and we'll get them in front of our panelists. Read cost going to zero. I understand that this technology will become commoditized, but will we, founders, companies, be paying for this in the same way we pay for AWS, or a different model, asks Tim Pierce. What do you think, Jeremy?
I mean, I think if you think about the complexity of these models, it's pretty tough to think about running them yourself. I mean, GPT-2, I think, is like 850 gigabytes of model data, and then GPT-3, I can't remember how many billions of points it has, but it's going to be very hard to run that unless you have a pretty sophisticated infrastructure. So I think we're going to mostly see these things being used on the same basis as AWS, hosted on big server farms that have lots of graphics cards and then lots of GPUs that can give results in reasonable time. I don't think there's any huge value for most startups to think about hosting those themselves or building those themselves.
Yeah.
And there's a whole, and of course, there's a whole category of new startups coming out which are in the business of providing that kind of infrastructure to host this kind of model. So that's another big opportunity.
Yeah. Do you think companies that aren't using some form of AI are gonna be left behind? And if so, how long? How long will it take for this to be something that it's not optional? Because I'm looking at it like smartphones or the computer. It's like when the iPhone came out, you could persist for a little bit without smartphones, but pretty soon it started to become something that you kind of needed just to come to the table in the business world. What do you guys think?
The time at the x-axis is always very hard to predict. That's like the hardest thing, I think, and often people get it wrong. I mean, I think there's always this technology adoption curve, right? That it's kind of a cliche where there's this sort of peak of overinflated expectations, and then it kind of crashes into a pit, and then it kind of comes out and normalizes. Now, whether that cycle is going to take a year or 5 years, I don't know. But I think we're definitely on the kind of upswing, and we're going to see a lot of people trying a lot of different use cases, and it's not going to work for a certain percentage, and then we'll kind of suddenly everyone will say, oh, it's going to fail and it hasn't worked, and it will kind of normalize. So I think we're in a period of rapid experimentation.
Yeah. Chhavi, what's your take on that?
I agree with that. So I was fortunate to be working in a VC fund when iPhone came out. So I was kind of having a front row seat to the explosion of apps that came about during the when they opened up the app stores. That's why I keep like creating a parallel between the two scenarios. One of the differences between the two is that iPhone was more of a B2C kind of thing. Every individual would have a hand on it. Whereas this technology will mostly be used at scale by businesses. And one thing I want to say very clearly is that if you are forcing ChatGPT on your business, you should never do that. If you find yourself struggling to find a use case, maybe it's not the right time to do it. If an investor realizes that you put a GPT thing in your business or your deck just for the sake of it, I don't think it's going to be a good outcome for any party. So a lot of investors are wary of over investing in something just for the sake of it. There is FOMO. You might be able to get some initial funding, but eventually sanity will prevail. So unless you find a real use case that you can justify and leverage AI for, don't just rush into it because it's out there that everyone is talking about, because there are cycles to tech adoption, and we're at the very early stages of that euphoric phase where there are a lot more stages left before people know what the stable state for this technology is. So you don't want to miss out on the whole journey, but you don't want to bet your farm on something like that if you haven't seen similar cycles in the past, which VCs have, you as a founder might not have. So make sure you keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, I definitely saw a lot of decks over the last few years that had Web3 or blockchain kind of like bolted onto the side of the business. It was like a complete business and pitch. And then the last two slides was like something with distributed ledger. And it just seemed like this doesn't make any sense. And I imagine that's going to happen. People are going to do that with AI as well. And then there are those companies where it just seems like it's a great fit. Like maybe Flyte is a good example of that.
Yeah, so we still don't use ChatGPT though. We are thinking about it. We are planning about some use cases, but we don't use it yet. But yes, so if you've been an AI company in the past, or you have a very organic way of implementing AI that you know cannot be done otherwise, then that is something that you should definitely try. So for instance, people are talking about marketing companies using that to create copy, or legal companies using that to digest information or even create more documents. Those are legitimate use cases. And then there are other use cases where you feel like it's been shoehorned, it's been forced into this problem just because everyone is talking about it. There comes a time when VCs kind of use that as a like a filter out mechanism, where you're like Control F, ChatGPT, delete, because I feel like it's just going to be 99% fluff. You don't want to create that environment. So make sure it's very organic, at least for your company.
Yeah. What are the industries that are going to be turned on their head, in your guys' opinion?
Yeah, I can start here. I feel like if you look at an industry that has a lot of documentation, especially written documentation, even oral one, those are the ones that are primed for disruption in this case. So like, for instance, legal comes to mind, marketing comes to mind, education, unfortunately, is being forced into this because of students adopting it and the professors not. So we haven't found a stable state there yet. So any industry that's overly dependent on written or spoken text and content will be the prime targets there. Anything else might seem slightly forced. I want to touch upon some use cases we did talk about earlier about automating some of the boring stuff that we do. Most of that stuff was automatable 5 years ago. You just had to know a programming language to do it. Today, you have this interface of ChatGPT to tell this technology what to do. So all that it has done is created an interface that allows common people to automate their things without having to know programming. That doesn't mean it has brought on automation to the fore. It's already been there, especially in the enterprise space where there are already companies that are doing it. So make sure you understand, if you want to become efficient as an organization, use ChatGPT to whatever extent you can. Obviously, it helps a lot. If you want to use ChatGPT as a part of your offering, you want to make sure that it makes sense there and you do it in a way that helps. If you can make your customer's life easy by simplifying things, by digesting things, summarizing things, implying things using AI, that can go a long way. So think about that in whichever industry your company is in.
Yeah. Jeremy, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't think this is unique to any particular industry. I think anywhere where you have lots of data, obviously lots of written data. And I mean, I said this before, but one thing I will add is one of the things I'm seeing GPT and similar large language models be really, really good at is, and it's not a new use case, but is taking unstructured data, taking large documents and turning that into structured data that's machine readable. Now that's not new, but it does seem like there's a sort of, again, a sort of inflection point here where these large language models can, you know, whether you describe it as them really understanding it or faking understanding it, but still they can take a kind of block of text and extract key points and turn that into structured data, which is then ingestible into other systems, which is very, very powerful for a lot of different use cases.
Yeah. Let's take another couple questions here. Do you see a new selling point created by humans, quote unquote, especially for human well-being and coaching solutions? Or would that be a pitch killer? Says Ann Coppins.
I feel like, again, if I go back to that curve, we're in the hype part of the curve, so that's not the time to be saying it right now. But when we come into the pit of despair afterwards, I think absolutely people will. There's always a you know, equal and opposite reaction, right? So after the hype cycle kind of peaks, we'll definitely see people selling the benefits of non-AI generated content.
Kind of like vinyl a little bit, where, you know, we had CDs and we have MP3s and we have streaming, and now vinyl is having a resurgence. And but actually, I've heard that the vinyl market is growing rapidly. So who knows how big that will get? What do you think, Chhavi?
Yeah, I agree with that.
Humans, is that going to be a selling point?
I feel like eventually, in a way, they will say that would be one of the stamps of approval, that it's like handcrafted stuff is more expensive than machine generated one, even in the physical realm. So I think that's going to happen, but it does become like more of a hobby kind of industry where, yeah, you took the time to write it, maybe I'll take the time to read it. Otherwise, let's just both use the technology and save each other some time. And so there's going to be a fringe subset of people who would continue to do it. Most people would eventually want to minimize that. And the good thing about this is it frees up time that you can use for things that you value. So it's not like you're being lazy if you use ChatGPT to digest a big document. You're just saving time that you can use for other more productive stuff. Many times I've read books and I'm like, I can summarize what that book said in like 5 paragraphs. You don't have to write a book for that. It's just fun to read that, but essentially you're also taking every reader's time. If a technology can tell me in 5 bullet points what I'm going to learn from a book, I think that's a lot of time saved. So, and that's just personal preference. Other people like it, but I feel like being able to save time to write, convey, and understand things with each other in a more efficient way is obviously a good point, because then you can utilize that to make things more interesting and innovate instead of type out stuff and say stuff and stuff like that, which is what we do at Flyte as well, because many times when you discuss something like this, I know you're recording this call, but if someone were to say, you know what, I could not make it to this call. What was discussed? How could I know everything that someone knew who actually attended it? Apart from looking at the whole recording again, listening to the whole thing for another hour, can you tell them with just a fit that you don't have to spend 5 hours creating that gist, but that gist is going to save a ton of time for everyone, because they can read those 5 bullet points and know exactly what was discussed in this 1 hour. That was one of the problems we were trying to solve. That's one of the things that ChatGPT can do. Remember, ChatGPT is domain independent, which means it's only accurate to a certain extent. So if you find a use case in your industry, you have to go beyond what ChatGPT can do. Otherwise, you're going to get generic results that are okay, but not as good as they should be, which is why becoming really specific in a domain and making it more accurate is going to be the name of the game eventually.
Yeah, that makes sense. Mitchell asks, for products that require ChatGPT to understand a private knowledge base, should we wait for GPT-4 or is GPT-3 appropriate?
Well, again, just repeating, I think, some of the discussion earlier. So GPT-2, GPT-3, and GPT-4 are all going to be trained on huge data sets of data from the internet, from Wikipedia and web crawlers, so that their knowledge is inherently generic. If you want to train a large language model on another set of data, you have to do that yourself, and you can't currently do that using GPT, because GPT is just a model that has been built by OpenAI on a certain set of data. So what we're going to see is a huge number of companies, I think, who are offering exactly that. They'll have the ability to take your own corpus of data and train a large language model on that for you, and then provide an API for you to query that yourself.
Does that exist already? Have you seen that happening now?
It is starting to exist, but I haven't heard that anyone's quite got to that point of making it super easy to happen. I hear a lot of pitches, but I haven't seen it take off quite yet.
Yeah. And, Google has remained in the lead for the last 20 years, in large part because they have remained in the lead. They've been the best search service. And so everybody's been using them. They have more data. They crunch that data. The search gets even better and better and better. I understand it's the same with training these AIs. So how do you see the future shaking out? Is there going to be another Google? Maybe it will be Google. Is there going to be one major player, or do you see an ecosystem of different verticals?
Yeah, I'll take that. I also want to touch upon a couple of things you guys just discussed around ChatGPT 2 versus 3 versus 4. So remember, the more content people start creating using ChatGPT, the next version is going to start consuming its own content. And over time, there's going to be circularity and garbage in, garbage out, and it's just going to be a mess. Everybody knows that. People will try and avoid it, but it's going to happen to some extent. So it's like asking, should I wait for iPhone 15 or should I buy the 14 one today? Use the one that you have today, get to a finish line, but keep an eye out on stuff that's evolving in this industry to make sure you're on top of things and know the limitations of what you're using today. That's one. I also want to touch on a little bit about, you mentioned your question around using your own knowledge base as an input and therefore being able to get results out of it. One of the fascinating things about AI is that they say you're going to use terabytes of data to create a model that can give you good results, which makes sense. But then when you give it a knowledge base of a couple hundred documents at most, that's not enough of a data point for an AI model to train itself. It's either going to super learn itself, overtrain itself, and not going to be good, or it's just not going to be able to provide you the kind of insights you expect to get from a knowledge base. So that is a problem for scientists. They are still struggling with it. The fundamental way of thinking about AI need to change if you want to create a small knowledge base and have a smart AI being able to decipher things out of it. So that's a different problem than what ChatGPT is solving today. So I see that will take slightly longer than we anticipate to do. So those are some of the answers to the things that you guys were discussing. Will, you were asking me a question, sorry.
Yeah, we were talking about
Google and search.
Remind me. Oh yeah, Google. Right. The hegemony of the market. Like how's that going to shake out?
Yeah, I think so. In at least my opinion in this case is very different from some of the other players out there. Again, ChatGPT is an interface. People like it, but Google has so far been able to provide an extremely simple interface, very similar to ChatGPT, where you have a text box where you put stuff in and get some results out of it. Now, people and everyone else have agreed that the results have been going down quality-wise with Google, and also the way Google algorithm works is essentially tries to rank everything on keyword and some of the other stuff, which means when you search for something, based on how good a job someone has done in terms of using those keywords to create their article, that article will come up in your results, irrespective of whether that actually solves the problem you're asking for or not. So Google doesn't understand what it is you're looking for when you search, and therefore the results are not essentially trying to solve the question, the problem that you're trying to solve, or answer the question that you're trying to ask. That aspect of Google will have to change because of this. They will be forced to do it. They're obviously the most suited to be able to do it because they have everything else in place. You already have a lot of folks whose default browser window opens up with google.com. So if they can improve their results using AI to make sure that when you ask a question, they understand the motive behind it and what it is you're trying to get to, and then give you results that are relevant based on what you asked for. That is essentially what they have to do. If you ask me, do they have to reinvent the whole search engine? I don't think that's true. I think that's a little bit of an overblown assumption. I wouldn't bet on them having to do that big of a job there, but people have disagreed on this for a long time. I'm happy to hear what Jeremy has to say.
Yeah, I don't think on this we have a lot of difference in our views. I mean, I think one thing that is worth maybe pointing out is that if you actually read about the creation of GPT-3, there are a lot of there's a lot of tinkering that was done within the model with human hands, just based empirically on what worked well. So this sort of idea that it was, again, it's not magic. It was tweaked until it gave meaningful completion results, and there was a kind of optimum found for that. The sort of fundamental techniques used to build these large language models are, relatively well known. I mean, a lot of this work, like most early stuff in computer science, starts with academics, and there are papers written on it. So it's not like there is secret IP in the techniques themselves. There is, a lot of resource required to assemble the massive training sets and to sort of clean the data and prepare it and train and iterate the model. So you do need a certain scale, but I don't think there's any. I don't think that kind of one vendor predominating is going to be an outcome that is likely. I think you're going to see all of any company that has the resources to build these large language models is going to try. And I think there are going to be a number of different vendors with sort of different approaches and a lot of innovation in them. I think I don't want to get too sort of breathy and futuristic around sort of the singularity and all those kinds of things, but I think there is sort of a circular process that happens as well, where the part of what GPT does is it doesn't literally analyze all of the data it's trained on. It kind of it builds heuristics to estimate what the likelihood of any individual word is occurring, and it's almost as if you're sort of using AI to train AI. So I think there's going to be this sort of process of continuing to improve the model with the model itself. That's going to be very interesting to see where it gets to.
Yeah, fascinating. It's like the humans it's like the Matrix a little bit, where we're just adding in our human touch and then the machine makes itself better. It's pretty unbelievable. Bing, do you think Bing is going to become a major player with this investment? What do you guys think? The future here.
I'm generally not particularly bullish on Microsoft and its ability to truly innovate. So I love the Xbox, but outside of Xbox, I'm not sure I think of them as a company that has a great track record of continuing to innovate. So I wouldn't be massively bullish on Bing.
Chhavi, what do you think?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I've been an ex-Microsoft, I've been an employee there, but I'll tell you the truth. I feel like you give a kid a toy to play with, depending on the kind of kid that is, whether they're going to enjoy it or just break it apart. I don't feel like Microsoft knows what to do with it in the right way. So personal opinion, but I don't think they're going to be able to utilize it to the full extent that they should be. And therefore, there is massive room out there to be able to leverage it correctly, whether it's Google or DuckDuckGo or someone else. It doesn't look like they know how to utilize a good technology in a more consumer-friendly manner. We've seen early signs of that. Some people have been posting about some of the debacles that Bing Search has done so far. So they're going to try and leverage their position because they own a lot of equity in that. But besides that, there are other tech players who can come up and always catch up with that. It's not an enterprise tool. It's a consumer technology, which kind of is also a disadvantage for Microsoft, because that's usually the way they've been able to compete with others so far in history, not based on technological superiority.
Yeah. All right. Well, there it is. Some predictions of the future. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you guys so much. Jeremy, if people want to find you or platform, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, I think Google for now will do the job. Just put in Platform Venture Studio. I'll put in the URL in the chat as well. Yeah, you can find us there. Please sign up. We have a pretty good community of people chatting about startups, so we'd love to see that.
Great. And Chhavi, where can people find you or Flyte? What's the best way?
Yeah, so you can go to my LinkedIn and find me. Happy to connect. I'll just put in the URL again for the website. If you guys just want to brainstorm on how to use AI in your startup, or you want to try this thing out, whatever, feel free to reach out to me. Very available. Love to talk to founders, so I'm happy to connect there.
Great. And founders on the recording or watching this after who are fundraising, I just want to remind everybody that our next cohort of Fundraising Mastery is launching in March, and our application deadline is March 8th, I believe. So get your application in. The sooner you apply, the sooner we can look over your application and potentially offer you admittance into that program. And that's a 90-day accelerator program to help you close seed funding, which is probably even more needed now in this current environment. So I encourage everybody to go and apply at fulcrumventureaccelerator.com. And Sharn, anything else to mention before we finish up here?
No, I think we've got everything. I just want to thank our amazing guests for joining us. You know, your insights are so invaluable. There's so many things founders are thinking about constantly. So I definitely think we're going to have a lot of people go back and watch this recording, and maybe we can figure out a little chat summary. Well, I like that idea.
Let's do that. Yeah. And we'll send
let's do that. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Just contact us as well at Fulcrum if you need anything, or if you have any questions about the program. And please be sure to connect with Jeremy and Chhavi, very gracious gentlemen who have lots of knowledge to share. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Jeremy. Chhavi.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, all.